Hi, my name is Eline, scientist in biomechanics, and this is Scenes Behind Science. So this month for me is all about fellowship and grant applications. As I've told in a previous vlog, as a young researcher, you're not permanent staff of the university. So currently I have a temporary contract at Imperial College London, which is funded by an NWO Rubicon grant. But this funding ends in August 2020, and that means I need to find new funding for my salary and research. So fellowship schemes can be from the university, the government or a fund. And there's not a lot of money. So basically only about 10% of the applications actually get the money in. What he assess you on is the quality of the researcher, the quality of the research you've done so far, and also the quality of the research proposal that you're asking money for now. So what is expected from a scientist nowadays? Well, that's quite a long list. Let's start off with research. You need to be able to come up with a good research question or hypothesis, and you need to know how to set up an experiment to answer this question or to test your hypothesis. And sometimes this also requires building measurement systems. And of course, this always requires eventually conducting the experiments. The amount of journal articles is quite important for a scientist because it's a big part of your assessment. And also it's really important how often other people refer to your work. That's what we call citations. And the more citations, the better the quality of your work, at least so they think. And therefore it's also very important that you're known in your field by other scientists. That's why we go to conferences. In the conferences we meet other scientists and we present our own work. Either via a poster or oral presentation, or even better, give a keynote. And last but not least, you have to act as a peer reviewer. So sometimes the editor of a journal asks you to assess one of the manuscripts they got in to determine if the quality is good enough to be published. And these editors, by the way, are also scientists, so sometimes you also have to act as an editor or a guest editor. Apart from research, you also provide the education at the university. So you set up courses, develop course materials, you give lectures, you grade exams and assignments, and sometimes you act as a supervisor for master students, bachelor students or PhD students. And you sometimes have to be an examiner, and that could be in an examiner board for a master student, that's your own master student, but sometimes it's also for a PhD student from another university. So another part of research is acquisition, and that's what I'm doing now. So finding money to fund my research and my salary. And that could be via grants, fellowships, or maybe via an industry partner. And at some part of your career, you're not doing the research by yourself. So you have enough money to hire PhD students or postdocs. And in that case, you also become a group leader and you need to manage your project. And last but not least, Federalization. So as a scientist, you need to make sure that your results actually end up in society. So they could be via a direct translation into a product, it could be implementation of some results, it could be patents, or it could be just about sharing your knowledge with a broader audience. So having been so focused on my research and fellowship applications in the last couple of weeks, it made me question whether this is the right way to do it. And also I have this romantic image in my head that scientists 200 years ago could just sit behind their desk and do science all day, writing equations. But I'm actually not sure if that is true. So today I made an appointment with Charity and she's going to tell me all about this.
Sorry, I was just on the loop.
Hello!
Hey guys, I'm Charity. I'm a friend of Eline's and I went to Leeds University and studied the history and philosophy of science. So today, Eline is arriving and we're going to be talking about what it was like being a scientist back in the day. And here she is!
I have this sort of romantic image in my head that as a scientist like 200 years ago you could just focus on science.
For some scientists I would say yes, there's probably an element of truth in that. I think there probably wasn't masses of money in research. There was certainly scrabble in order for the academics who wanted to be conducting the research to receive like financial payouts. So we could take for example Isaac Newton.
One of my favorites.
Yeah. I think for Newton, because he had the financial stability, he had rent payments coming in from his father's house that he could live off fairly comfortably, about £150 a year, which is hilarious to us. Like, that's not a tenth of my rent, but Newton could live off it.
Wasn't London.
It meant that he was fairly able to just sit and focus on what he found really interesting, and to write copious amounts on all of these, like, such a range of topics, such a diverse range of topics that he covered. You can't help but think like he just must have had hours and days and years to just pursue what he found interesting.
So were they part of a university, or would they just do their research from home?
The word scientist was only created in the 1830s, really. So before then, everybody was known as natural philosophers. There were certainly other people who were doing natural philosophy outside of the university world. Okay. So there were lots of people based in London. London was quite a thinking hub at that point. Men, particularly, mostly would get together and think about all of the new papers that were coming out of the great universities at the time. And they would sit in coffee houses drinking coffee and discussing the latest experiments and revelations and all these sorts of things. It was a socially homogenous group who were partaking in natural philosophy. People who could afford to sit around and theorise.
Newton was allowed to live at the university, so his living expenses were covered by the university. So what did the university ask from him? Like, did he have to publish?
Well, it didn't seem like the university particularly gave him any financial means or support to publish, so it doesn't strike me that they were pressurising him to publish things. His best work seems to be conducted actually when he wasn't at Cambridge, but the plague broke out just after he graduated from his undergrad, and so he had to go home. Cambridge was closed for 2 years, and it was at that point that he really started doing his really creative, forceful thinking in new ways, in terms of not just being stuck to the Cambridge syllabus, but starting to think about new things. And that's really where maybe his discoveries about gravity and that sort of thing, all of the myths that we have about Newton, you know, the apple falling on his head, that was in those 2 years when he was away from university.
One of the things I need to do is peer review. Was it the same back then?
In order to publish, you didn't need to be peer reviewed, so I think the process happened after publishing.
I know from my colleagues and me, it's sometimes really hard to get judged on your work. Mm-hmm. How's that for Newton?
He was heavily criticised by one of his peers called Hooke, and so they were writing letters to one another and explaining side of the argument and saying why what they thought was right, and it got too much for Newton. He eventually ended up in having a kind of mental breakdown and really had to just double in on himself.
Thank you so much for helping me today.
Thanks for having me.
Wow, so that was really interesting. So yes, scientists 300 years ago could focus more on science, but also had to scramble for money. And also I learned that their work-life balance wasn't really good. So I will just keep applying for funding to continue my research. I'll keep you posted on that. And for now, thank you for watching. See you next time. Doei!